I'm Kira Cleveland, and this is Human Intelligence. With my co host, Ned Hayes, we talk about the importance of human creativity in the age of AI. Welcome to the future. All right, welcome to another episode. Today we have Melanie Dusseau, who is a multi-genre writer, scholar, and creative professor from Toledo, Ohio. She holds an MFA from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and is the author of a poetry collection, The Body Tries Again. An associate professor of English at the University of Findlay, she teaches literature as well as crafts workshops in poetry, creative nonfiction, and many other writing classes. We're talking to her on the Human Intelligence podcast because in recent months, she's become an articulate defender of human creativity in the age of AI. So welcome to the show, Melanie.
Thanks so much for having me and for that introduction. It's nice to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. To kind of jump right in, let's talk about the elephant in the room, generative AI. What is it to you?
The first launch when people started talking about ChatGTP as kind of like an app, it came so quickly on the heels of the pandemic. So those of us who were kind of recovering from hybrid teaching and all of the upheavals that the pandemic had wrought on people's pedagogy and classroom styles were kind of like this weary mode of, oh no, another wrench in the process. And then very soon, the more research, especially in writing studies, folks in literature studies and comp and creative writing started to see the real ethical problems with the training corpus and the whole piracy issue. And I think there are a lot of reasons that people oppose large language models. It's kind of a complex set of different styles of opposition, but at least, and I don't speak on behalf of all writers, but writers in the academy, I think it was a combination of the ed tech solution for a problem that didn't exist and
Mhm.
the hypocrisy of the piracy, because now people
Mm.
are wringing their hands about plagiarism by offering a tool that was founded in theft of creativity. So really big combination of those two things that was at least my first introduction to it and understanding of it, which I'm guessing maybe has tainted my views from the get go.
Yeah, well, I find it kind of hilarious that tech bros have created something with great expense and great environmental damage and a lot of plagiarism and stealing of IP in order to duplicate something that I like to say, a drunk English major at 3 a.m. could probably produce anyway. So it's not as if they're creating something that is, immensely valuable that nobody has ever seen on this earth.
Yeah, and it's call it various versions of copy slop. I call it like like syntactically bankrupt, like it's sort of syntactically about nothing content wise,
Mm.
but grammatically correct. It is this weird nebulous beige kind of writing. So if it were some wonder mimic and when we're good at creative writing, as Sam Altman claims it is, right? He's like, now it does storytelling and poetry and it doesn't do those things. And even if it could, the part that it's so corrosive towards, at least from a student perspective, is craft. Those of us
Mhm.
who write any style of writing, journalism, creative nonfiction, know that, the things that you do to get better at writing are practice, and craft and process will always be backloaded into becoming a better writer. There isn't a shortcut to those things, and not because we're opposed to advances in technology or anti-progress or Luddites, but because it's corrosive to your ability to become a better writer.
Absolutely. And I love that point. And, you've really kind of become somewhat famous from your endeavors of the open letter from educators, right?
Yeah.
Created with Miriam Reynoldson. And I guess I've heard it has over 800 signatures. Like, how did that letter come about? And why was it
Um,
important to put it there?
full credit to Miriam, who is a wonderful person and educator, and we had become kind of LinkedIn friends, right? Because there's this whole little strange resistance space on LinkedIn, which I have never thought of as a social media platform the way I think about like Facebook or Instagram.
Mhm.
But it's become an exchange of ideas for people, not just in
Mhm.
the AI resistance, but also people who are thoughtfully integrating and really enjoy talking to people in the resistance in order to understand each other. So I met Miriam in that realm, and full credit to her. She's the one who really launched the letter and got the ideas out there. I helped her with a little bit of the wording, and then we used both of our platforms to kind of to get it out as far and wide as we could, attaching ourselves to some letters that had just come out from the Netherlands, and then the Writers Guild and Lit Hub had posted a letter that was specifically from writers to an audience of publishers. So they all sort of came out in the same couple week span, and I think that's one of the reasons that
Wow.
it really caught on. And the feedback that I've gotten, it's sort of funny, like with the poets are the least famous of all the genres. Nobody's a famous poet. So to be like the first person to sign the letter and then have people reach out and want to talk to you about it because of like your AI resistance, that's sort of
Mm,
it's funny to me, but I'm glad. I'm glad the conversation is happening because I know that there are faculty out there who are maybe at institutions where they don't have a lot of autonomy and agency,
mhm.
especially with regard to what's happening in higher ed in general, at least in the United States, that signing a letter, even anonymously, can help you feel some kind of solidarity, right? That there are other people who feel the way that you do, and that they are trying to do something about it.
Absolutely, and that has been one thing that I think is beautiful kinda coming out of this conversation around AI is there is this coming together and this
Mhm.
camaraderie and, efforts of solidarity, which is, I think, beautiful, so
It
thank you for
is.
being
That
a
is a
part of that.
positive for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, with that solidarity, and you said that on LinkedIn, there's a community of people who support this. Tell us more about that community. What kind of activities have you seen happen to kind of push back against the AI encroachment?
I really became aware of who I'm gonna put in the wing of the anti-hype folks, right? Like people like Emily Bender and Brian Merchant, and they have a series of like podcasts and newsletters and Substacks that are kind of all about Ed Zitron. I'd put in this category too, all about like
Mhm,
putting a deflating pin in the hype bubble surrounding generative AI. And I think the education wing comes at resistance a little bit differently, but the anti-hype folks have a really big platform and they're publishing really great, just almost treatises on why AI resistance is makes sense, at least
mhm.
logistically and financially. And when they look at all of these kind of economic arguments from these for-profit tech companies and the manipulations that they're doing to the market, it doesn't surprise me that they're starting with this implementation into a eroded higher ed, right? So the Department of Education is on the, is in a precarious place. So the idea of starting at K through 12 and then
Mhm.
eventually getting to college, it makes a lot of sense. So back in November, I published the op-ed in Inside Higher Ed, and that made me aware that it wasn't just some, some nobody English prof who was like, I'm mad about this. It was kind of like this big network of scholars and people with a far wider reach than me that were really talking about it from a lot of different angles. So I kind of became connected with a few of those people, again on social media, sharing some of their ideas. And it made me realize the amount of feedback that I got from other people when that op ed was published, how many people were waiting for someone to say something similarly and not sort of couch resistance in this way that I see it broached a lot, where you want to start to apologize and say, I'm not anti technology. I believe in progress. But what you really want to say is you don't believe in generative AI and you think the technology sucks and you think the companies that are putting them out are unethical and you don't think they're good pedagogy or teaching and that
Yeah.
it's okay to just say that too. So that's really how I got started and connected with a lot of people in different spaces of the resistance movement.
That totally makes
Great.
sense, and, there is a lot of hype around it, and I think one of the questions that a lot of us are asking ourselves is, like, "Why is AI being pushed at us?"
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts around that?
I think it's this almost a desperation of what I call the inevitability argument. And you hear it so much in
Mhm.
pushback to resistance. People that say, look, it's here to stay, as if there's, that's someone decided that. There's nothing you can do. It's here to stay. And if you don't reckon with it, you're a person who is putting your head in the sand. I've had that said to
Mm,
me quite a bit. And what I think people who are, let's say, pro AI maybe don't realize about the resistance is that we are not literate in these technologies. We're not
right.
Luddites in the sense that we're afraid of technology or afraid of understanding it. Because I won't use generative AI in my own writing craft, And how does one teach, if you even call it teaching, how does one facilitate a creative writing workshop? But to say, hey, if this works for me, might not work for you. So the idea that you would recommend this kind of technology to your students, to me, was just bad teaching. So there are so many different ways to come at the inevitability argument, but it has been a bit despairing because it seems to be winning out. People seem to be kind of tossing up their hands and saying, maybe they're right. Maybe this is inevitable and it's going to invade every aspect of our lives, be ubiquitous, as well as be a part of teaching and classrooms and online culture. And that
Hmm.
we're just kind of stuck with it. I keep calling it the add on nobody asked for, right? That it's just like,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, just to play devil's advocate for a second, what's wrong with students using AI in the classroom to generate papers or to generate poetry or stories? What's the downside there? And I think I have my own answer, but I'd love to hear yours.
I think it's manyfold. Like one of the ways that students used it that hadn't even occurred to me, because I thought most creative writing students are like, I'm here to learn how to be a better writer. They can understand having like a no AI policy. But I found out that some of them were putting it through for workshop feedback. Like,
Mm,
I don't know what to say about this person's poem, so I'm just going to ask ChatGTP. So
Oh.
I start day one explaining to the class that I don't use technology, software like turnitin.com, because it's a data scraper and it's a privacy issue. And if you're hurting your chances at future publication, if you put your poems and stories, even to be edited, through a chatbot. They're just part of the training corpus in perpetuity. So you,
mhm,
one, can't make that decision on behalf of another writer and put their labor into a chatbot, and you probably shouldn't do it for your own. So I
Yeah.
really start to appeal to students on a very practical level because, for the most part, publishing has put out do not send us AI generated material, at least for creative pieces for now. Anybody in the querying trenches in the world of fiction knows this, that you get asked that. Did you use AI in any part of your package? And they mean process work too. They mean your synopsis and your cover letter. So when you
right.
get to say no because they don't want it, they don't want that slop, you need to pass that message on to your students. What's happening in commercial publishing? Because sure, some of them
Mm.
might be taking a creative writing class just for fun. That's a good reason to take a creative writing class, but a lot of students in our classes are consider themselves, future novelists and poets and playwrights and screenwriters, and they really want to go into this field in a very sincere and honest way. So appealing to them on that practical level, and then on the future publication level, and then I try to bring in the ethical arguments and sort of point them towards different aspects. I really love Ted Chiang's Why AI Isn't Going to Make Art, which came out in the New Yorker last year. I
Oh,
thought that
yeah.
was
Mhm.
a really beautiful, kind of evocative piece for the rally cry for the human side of creativity, which creative writing, at least as long as we're considered an academic discipline, I feel like we have to stand up for human creativity. Who else in the arts and humanities can do it with a more strident voice? Because we're all language users. So
We couldn't agree
Yeah.
more. And, along those lines, what do you see as the biggest differences between human and machine content as far as the writing process goes?
When the stories first started coming out, like there was one from a few months ago that AI had conquered meta fiction, which is like kind of a subgenre of fiction that is self-referential and ironic. And the Altman was claiming that ChatGTP could now write meta fiction and that it was, quote, really good. Right. So
Right.
I really love writers out of the academy who have been very strident and robust at calling out this BS in very kind of colorful language. And I think that maybe they're even better positioned to do it than we are, because we have the writers in the academy have this sort of added layer of trying to fulfill our obligations as teachers, and writers
Mm.
out in the sort of wild or real world have no such kind of filter to say what they mean about this technology. So I think that you can also examine the stories if you want to use AI. And from a poetry standpoint, they're not good. There's this
Mhm.
idea of them being capable. Like there was one study that came out that the average reader couldn't tell the difference between an AI generated poem and a human written poem. And, there's some level of people who think that the higher your level of content expertise, of course, if you're just a lay person, maybe you don't study and read or understand or like poetry, that you might think, oh, that looks pretty good. It reminds me of the old kind of pushback to modern art, where people are like, my kid could do that, like. So I
Uh-huh.
think there's this level of a layperson's understanding of one genre and being like, AI is kind of good enough. And I always thought that argument was really disrespectful to the audience, because what I
Mhm.
think is going to happen is that there probably will be more AI generated poems and novels and stories, and that readers are going to be able to discern the difference. That there's going to, I hope, come this full circle kind of albatross where the artisan, the analog, the handcrafted will make a, not even a comeback, but that readers will appreciate it all the more, because in contrast to this sort of lifeless gray copy slop, they'll be able to tell the difference. And we should always treat our audience with enough respect that they can discern those differences.
Right, and I
Absolutely. And
don't
I
think that we need to put all the burden on the readers either, that
Mhm.
they have to sort it all out. Absolutely.
Agreed.
Kira, I'm sorry, I think I cut
No,
you
no
off there.
worries. No, there's so much great elements to talk about here. It's hard to help myself. I was just gonna say, I think the point you made about it being good enough, people saying, "Oh, it's good enough," or most people won't necessarily recognize it. I think that is really interesting, disheartening a bit. And part of what a lot of people are concerned about is, without the exceptional, right? Without people creating exceptional work, what you're getting is a lot of this AI middle ground, medium, average, right? And so then the content that people get used to is average, right? Because it is this mathematical equation and it looks at all the poems and goes, here's an average poem, right? And so it's a point that many other community members within that space have also voiced concern
Absolutely.
for.
And I also
Mhm.
agree with Ned that it can't just be the reader, because, you can tell this from just, if you read a lot of this, just even from grading, if you're a teacher, that it's very difficult sometimes to discern. So I've heard of solutions from the Writers Guild, the kind of human authored almost watermark that might become available. I'm quite certain that you're going to see this more and more in things like acknowledgments pages, or like little addendums to at least novels or maybe short story collections. Like, I am a human and I didn't use AI for any part of my craft, because I think it is also on the creators and the writers to honor that pledge if they have taken such a pledge.
Absolutely.
Right, and that's definitely something that our team is actually working here on at the Human Intelligence Institute, that we're working on a way to allow people to actually tag their work as human created rather than having any input by AI. And it's tricky because we can't always see underneath the hood of what's happening, of how something was created. And so being able to create a layer of trust there is vitally important, both for readers and for people who are creating in the first place. They want to know that their work is valued. So speaking of value, you're an author yourself. You have spent a lot of time, I imagine, working on your poems, working on other pieces, nonfiction, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about your process? Part of the reason I'm asking is that this is probably quite a bit different than a process of just pushing a button and generating some text.
Yeah, I was very kind of, for poetry, an analog person. I start out longhand in a notebook. I'm always been a kind of a researcher and take lots of messy notes and crossouts. I never put a poem into a document until I'm ready to think about line breaks. And I write mostly free verse, so the line is sort of everything. And then my craft changed dramatically when I decided to write a novel, which I have like mad respect, Ned, for anybody that is a fiction writer, because long form fiction is not for it is an entirely different thing. So then my process became one that's known as pantsing, right? You're either a plotter
Mhm.
or a pantser. So I am firmly in the pantsing camp, but I am a pantser by way of research. So I got to take a group of students in the May to Ireland, and I did some research in the archives at the University of Galway. So You're only allowed to have a pencil and paper. You're allowed to use your phone to take photographs of the archives. And these were a lot of letters about the Aran Islands. I was researching this for my work of fiction that I was working on. So it felt very old school to me. So I was almost glad that I decided to become a writer during this AI revolution, because I felt like it complemented what I already knew about craft from the world of poetry and essay writing. And then by the time I got to cranking out the first draft of this novel, it was a really good compliment to be a meticulous researcher and a messy note taker and do kind of extensive character arcs and biographies before I even start drafting. And then once all that done, all that chaotic pre writing is done, then I just kind of dove into the draft. And I was very slow. I don't know if this is because I revise the way I revise poetry, which is, most poems are only a page long, so it's not that big of a deal if it takes you like a couple days to revise a single
Yeah.
page. But it is a big deal when you're past the 9,000 word mark and you're like, oh, it took me, to get this chapter correct, and very painstaking. But I think it also made me a little cleaner drafter. Like I didn't have as much, not developmental edits, but proofreading kinds of edits from my first draft. When I gave it over to beta readers, it wasn't as terrible as I thought it would be. So my process is painstakingly slow, but I think I'm actually getting faster. Maybe everybody is really slow writing their first novel because you don't know what your style is until you teach yourself how to write it as you're writing it. So,
I
um,
love that
Right.
point.
yeah.
I was just going to say, for those of you who don't know, pantser versus plotter is a standard mode, two different modes of writing for fiction writers. And pantser means by the seat of your pants. You just head into the chapter and just start writing, and you don't necessarily know where it's going, which is a wonderful way to be. But also, you can end up in dead ends, you can end up in plot holes. It's adventuresome, but also kind of scary.
It is very scary. You can end up in the
So,
soggy middle where you're like, "Oh, now things are supposed to happen." This is the thing about fiction writers, right? Oh, it looks like I love characterization. Scene setting is my favorite thing in the world, like atmosphere. Like give a poet a description of something, and those are the parts that readers skip, right? Like nobody cares about your
mhm.
beautiful sentences about the beautiful trees, get to the what happens part, which is very, very difficult. I found plot to be extremely difficult.
Mm.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
I wanted to kind of call out along those lines a post that you shared a couple weeks ago, and it said artisan craft may not be the most efficient, but when consumers demand quality and ethics in both products and labor, I wish more people realize that this includes other items made by human intellect and creative labor, namely books. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, this back to this idea of the artisan, and the analogy sometimes I think that people get is coffee, right? Like very finely brewed
Mm.
French press versus the quick Keurig, like automatic, and it's just sort of it's still coffee, it'll do, it's good, but the finely crafted brews that a poet or a careful fiction writer or playwright will do will always have a bigger payoff for the audience and also for, like, the joy of craft. One of the things when, back in February, Tom Robbins, the author, died, and his New York Times obituary talked about his really painstaking craft, that he would write sentences longhand, and he would labor over a single sentence and, like, "This isn't right," and it would take him so long, and then all you have to do is, at random, pick up any Tom Robbins novel and, like, flip to it and just look at how much you see the care for syntax in his craft.
Mhm.
It is amazing, and it shows, and I think that's what I mean by artisan.
Well, so in recent weeks, you've also posted some imaginary conversations, I think, with Sam Altman. Uh, Sam Altman is the CEO of OpenAI. He's been somewhat controversial. He was fired by the board for a while, then he came
Yeah.
back. So I would love to hear more about your conversations with Sam Altman. It seems like maybe there's a book in there. You could do a short series of
Oh, yeah.
conversations, but what would you say to Sam if he was on the show right now?
There are interviews sometimes that I read with him, that I read about him, or that he's given, that I don't ever wanna take someone to task for being, really earnest, because occasionally he seems really earnest about the AI and maybe its chance for goodness, its chance to make a
Mhm.
difference in humanity. And I will tell you that in other realms not involving the arts and humanities, and I those aren't my fields. I don't know if AI can help with cancer research. This isn't something I'm qualified to even weigh in about. So when I hear him talking about advancements for humanity and things like neurotechnology or medicine, I can't fault the guy for his enthusiasm and for maybe the potential for some of this technology to do some good for humanity. And
Hmm.
then in the same light, he gives these very kind of tone deaf conversations to average people who are not, tech millionaires. One of them was, about the lamplighters, right? Nobody's looking back in time and wishing they were a lamplighter, like all of these sort of even working class kinds of jobs that a lot of people think the AI revolution will take over in this kind of dystopian universal basic income Elon Musk kind of way. There is that set of technology people that are very connected to, science fiction offerings for what they call AGI, artificial general intelligence, which I think is one of Altman's goals in OpenAI is to achieve, as they say, AGI. So I kind of started that as a little tongue in cheek way to sort of make fun of some of the things that he said, but I say that
Right.
also not with apology, but with, I don't know him personally, and I'm sure he does think that there are things in the technology that can do some good for humanity. The things that he talks about with regard to writing, and now with the implementation into Canvas, which is one of the largest learning management systems, thousands of people across all campuses use Canvas. My university uses Canvas. So
Hmm.
OpenAI has partnered with Canvas to launch. We haven't seen it yet because I don't know what educators were involved in this integration it into our learning management systems. So that to me is that encroachment into education where I don't feel the technology from a safety or ethics perspective is ready for prime time. So sometimes
Hmm.
the very exuberant ways that he makes announcements and launches these things kind of gets on my nerves. So I wanted to start a little more like tongue in cheek kind of way to ironically have a conversation with him. So that's where those started.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
And
he's definitely getting on a lot of people's nerves this past couple weeks with
yeah.
the launch of GPT-5, which kind of failed and they had to roll back to the previous one. So maybe some cracks in his armor are beginning to show. I just feel like maybe you saw them first because you were poking at it already.
Yeah. And it's just, the way that some of the you know, even Meta and Grok and the sort of other people in this tech world, it's kind of clear sometimes that they don't have deep connections to like regular average people to whom this
Hmm.
technology it impacts. And people who do work in for poverty, and you mentioned that the eco destroying quality of these big data centers, like this is sometimes you'll hear it talked about in the conversation of AI, the human toll that it takes in places that,
Hmm.
you know, we're all as technology users and smartphone users and laptops, all of it, culpable in that footprint, but that AI has made that footprint so much deeper
Hmm.
that the way that tech owners sometimes talk about that is, I wish more people would call them out. And
Yeah.
if I have sharp
Well,
elbows, you should read Ed Zitron because he just really tears
he
everybody apart.
destroys them, doesn't he? Yes,
He
he
does.
absolutely does. He punctures the bubble every day. So, as we are, fighting in this kind of battle to affirm human creativity and to affirm human agency in the age of AI, what do you think is next in this back and forth?
I'm by nature kind of an optimistic person. So it really
Mhm.
depends on how dystopian I am feeling. If anybody in higher ed right now with kind of the attack on DEI that's happening, on faculty autonomy, it's a difficult space to maintain like an optimistic outlook. But then I think
Mhm.
to things like the basics, and I love being in the classroom. I'm thankful that I don't teach online, that I teach mostly creative writing, where I can try out all of these kinds of new ideas that are a result of me responding to students' need to avoid, I'm calling it touch grass pedagogy,
Mhm.
gonzo literary criticism, where I just like get out there and be involved in the content of the stuff that you're learning, that you're reading, because you are a part of
Mhm.
it. So that to me is a good spin on it. Like I'm looking forward to experimenting with my own pedagogy more. I think my responses to it for avoiding it in various technologies has helped my own craft. And I'm happy to pass along the things that I learn about that to my students. So that's the positive side of me. But then, you know, the toll that I see chat users, the mental health toll, when you read just like common interest pieces of people using ChatGTP for therapy, or people, creating pseudo religions or pseudo scientific beliefs based on a chat conversation that they've had with a large language model, with this automated response, with something that does not even think, that troubles me for thinking about the future.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And many of us can relate to that. And, I just want to say, I just want to acknowledge you, like, I'm so grateful there are people like you out in the world who have this passion for teaching, for the struggle and, the process that creativity requires, and that you're out there still helping new writers, new creators discover the joy in that, the value in that, in this time of AI. So thank you for being vocal and involved and really making a difference.
I appreciate that. That's a nice thing to hear, because classes start on Monday. So I'm in a particular hell that those of us who are like, oh, I don't know anybody who is ready until the day of. So I'm not quite ready, but I'm not panicking yet. It's only Friday, right?
There we go. Well, hang in there. And I hope the first days of school are wonderful. And, your students are lucky to have you. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been wonderful talking.
Thanks for having me. It was really great to talk to you both.
Appreciate it. You can find out more about any of these news items and hear the complete interview on the extended premium version of our podcast at humanintelligence.news. Today's episode was produced by Ned Hayes and engineered by Muhammad Adnan. Our analog-only human-themed music was created for the Human Intelligence podcast by Josh Pinkston of Nature and Spirit. This episode, and every episode, is brought to you by the Human Intelligence Institute team. That's all for Human Intelligence. Thanks for listening to today's episode. As always, this episode is available online at humanintelligence.news.